Welcome back to another episode of Swing'it with Winget, and our podcast. This little clip's going to be about asset protection. Come swing it with Winget. And what I mean by that is real estate and assets that you own or want to accumulate or acquire in real estate. And I'm going to share some of my life experiences and things that really have caused me issues and also saved me issues. So I think my first house that I bought, my wife and I actually were part of a home flip, right? When we were about 21, before we'd built our first house. And, I had two partners, my dad and my brother. And, it's a little bit complicated. Everything went fine. We didn't mess with the chain of title. We didn't mess with attorneys or anything like that because it was going to be a quick flip. And then once we closed on it, like 60 days later, we just divvied out the money. Okay. Now, a lot of people getting started in real estate are actually going to have different tools and resources to work from. And so some of these things might not apply to you now, but there'll be things to consider and possibly get set up over time just to make sure that when you are ready to buy a house, that, man, it's a big expense. It's obviously going to be probably your most expensive investment and liability that you'll probably ever own up to that point. So we're going to talk about when to get it protected through asset protection, attorneys, or legal side of things to make sure someone can't swoop in and take it from you. Or if you get into a bad situation, a pickle, a lawsuit, or an accident where someone wants to come and do an asset search, they might find these assets in your personal name, and then they might attach them to that lawsuit and represent the court that you've got all this money and your insurance didn't cover what they were hoping to get or what they feel like they were owed, and so they will attach to those assets in your personal name. So the second house that I bought was actually Melissa and I's first house, and we built it. We got a mortgage on it. And I didn't know anything about asset protection. I did what anyone else would do. I think I was 22. And we got the mortgage. We kept it in both of our names. And that's just the way it was for quite some time. My third property was an investment property I bought from my concrete friend who was selling his home and upgrading. Because I had a line of credit that I took out after my home was built to finish my basement and do some other things, I was able to use that down payment. I think it was a $50,000 line of credit from U.S. Bank. I bought my home for $225,000. I put 10% down. It was worth probably $300,000 after a few years, and so I tapped into the equity, got a $50,000 line of credit. And back then, stated income, things like that weren't an issue if you had good credit and a good work and employment history, which we did. And even though our tax return probably wouldn't have shown enough to qualify, per se, for another investment property, we were able to do a stated income loan, use the down payment from our HELOC on our primary residence, and buy our first legitimate rental property that we fixed up. And then we rented, and I had that property for probably about 10 years that I ended up selling for somewhere around $400,000. I bought it for $150,000. So where asset protection comes into play is further down the road after I had done multiple flips and I owned multiple homes on my own, and I started to acquire and have equity in a lot of different properties. I was making pretty good money at the time, probably $500,000 to $1 million a year. I think I probably had 25 properties at the time which is not, I wouldn't recommend waiting that long. And this is why we're having this discussion. I didn't know anything about it. My parents didn't teach me about it. I didn't have a mentor. So I was just like, man, I've got 20, 25 properties my wife and I own personally. Well, it seems like there's a lot of equity here. As a business owner and learning the risks and the pros and cons of doing different things, how do I preserve this? How do I protect this in case anything, might happen? God forbid, right? So I can't remember how I found Chris Turner's name. He was a specialist. I was in Salt Lake. He was actually in Orem, about 30 minutes away. I called him. We set up an appointment, and he came in and said, look, these are all your properties, and we need to break down what the equity position is on each of them. But the first one was my primary residence. At this point, this was my third house that we had lived in, and I paid $300,000 for it, and then I put about $300,000 into equity, like sweat equity and cash and improvements to build this thing just the way we want it and totally remodel it. So at the time, I think it was probably worth $700,000 or $800,000. There's $500,000 there. So what he did is he mapped out all of the homes that we had, and then he took our primary residence and we have a LLC that he put together specifically for our primary residence. Okay, and that was totally separate. And it was put into a family trust. Okay, the title was quitclaim from Brad Winget to the family trust. It was BPW or MW Family Trust or something like that, and totally isolated now. So anything that happened to me personally or Melissa personally, this home is now owned by a fire-blocked LLC, and that's the only purpose for that LLC. As long as I pay those annual dues and I follow the details of that LLC, which the attorney was part of his package to take care of on an annual, quarterly basis, then that asset is now preserved and protected, okay, as long as I make my mortgage payments and things like that. So then he took the other 20 homes that we had, and he's like, all right, these homes you've got $25,000 equity, worst case in this one, 50 in that one, 100 in this one. And he divided them into fire-blocked entities of around 5 entities total, but 4 or 5 homes in each entity. So, and then he created a management company, okay, separate from my primary residence. It was BPW and MW Management, still the company that we use today. But then he had a B&M Holdings 1, and then 2, and 3, and 4, and 5. And then depending on how much equity each of these homes had, he slid those, he proposed putting these properties, quitclaiming them with their title company, paying the recording fees, having the deeds notarized and prepared, and then the title company would record it with the county. And essentially, even though I had mortgages on a lot of these, right, this is totally legal. It's totally done on a daily basis. There's nothing wrong with it from the lender or the docs or anything like that. We quitclaimed every single one of these houses into one of these entities, okay? And then we also talked about our future goals. How many homes are we going to have, and what's the likelihood that we'll get more homes, and what equity position or down payments that you might make as you grow your organization and your assets. So I think in 2007 or 8, I ended up, Melissa and I had, I think, 45 properties total. Between 40 and 45. Some of those might have been lots, and that we were going to build on and things like that. And some of them might have been acquired through other people's credit that they quitclaimed to us, and we would have a wraparound mortgage that we secured on the title of the home. So the mortgage instrument and documents for the lender were protected, and it was all legal, and we basically were the owner, but now we were paying the lender through a third party called the escrow specialist. And we picked up quite a few homes that way. You get to a point where you can't necessarily buy a bunch of homes in your own personal credit, right? And so that was a way that we picked up a good portion of our homes where other people would file bankruptcy or get divorced or die, or, there was something that happened, and they, doing mortgages or real estate, they'd call me and say, hey, I don't know if you want this house, but we're just going to walk away from it. And they call me and see if I wanted to sell it or if I knew anybody that might want to buy it. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm in the mood to buy some real estate. And I was acquiring homes. And so I would give them a little bit of money or whatever they needed if it made sense for both sides. And then we would close the transaction. And then we would slide that house in the title into the entity that was already prearranged by my asset protection attorney. Okay. So asset protection's huge. businesses, especially if you're self-employed or if you just own an investment property like a vacation home or a rental property, why is it important and how much does it cost? It's about $1,000 if you were to pay an attorney. It might be $2,000 worst case to drop all the documents, decide. At the time our entities were held in Nevada, which is was a non-disclosure state on who owned properties and different things. So there's benefits in different states. And so these experts, they go ahead and do all the research on this and decide what the costs are and the annual quarterly filings and the requirements to maintain those assets and LLCs and asset protection entities. And then they will recommend to you, depending on your financial situation, what is best for you. So now our entities are in Utah. We moved them from Nevada to Utah. And I don't have all 5 entities because I've sold a lot of the properties, and I now have most of my properties are vacation rentals and are worth a lot more, but I have less of them, and I kind of cherry pick. And that's something that I've progressed towards versus the long-term rentals. Okay, so but all of my houses, and it doesn't have to necessarily happen right at closing. Sometimes it might be easier to put it in your personal name to do a mortgage or whatever, and then you might not get around to quit claiming it till later, or you might have to set up a new entity and then you quit claim it. But you really should have this concept in mind before you buy properties, and you can fire block them. And then if life circumstance happens and you get sued, or you get found liable, or some kind of a judgment comes upon you from your business or one of your kids or some crazy thing that you just never could plan for, right? Then they can't go after the LLC. The LLC is not a part of your personal financial situation as long as they can't pierce that the corporation or the LLC, and you've been paying it and it's current and everything's been done properly. So it just removes the asset completely from your balance sheet when it comes to other people doing searches to try and take your assets. They don't even show up on county records or, in court doc, inquiries or anything else that attorneys or collection specialists will go to. So that's something I'd highly recommend, finding a good attorney. There's plenty that specialize in this. You can go to Google. You can ask different real estate agents or different real estate investors or title companies who they may know that could refer you to somebody that specializes in corporations and LLCs and asset protection specifically. And I'd recommend, even if you don't own property but you think you will, to start processing this concept and start planning for what might happen. And the sooner you have the plan, the sooner you're going to be able to keep what you've worked so hard for. And so that's half the battle. Making a lot of money is one thing. Keeping it is an entirely different thing. And it's both of them actually pretty, I'd say, equally challenging. Okay, so you don't want to work your whole life to amass everything that you and your family have done just so somebody can come take it away. So asset protection is the key, and I highly recommend it. Hopefully this has been helpful. Certainly has saved me from a lot of different challenges and a lot of different pitfalls and a lot of different dicey situations. And I was able to preserve those assets, preserve my equity, preserve the hard-earned money that I've worked so hard for, my wife and I. And anyway, hope this is helpful. Over and out. Today's podcast was brought to you by Utah's Best Vacation Rentals. Whether you're looking for a 3-bedroom townhome or a mansion with an indoor pool, Utah's Best has a vacation home for every budget and occasion. To book your next incredible Utah vacation, go to utahsbestvacationrentals.com. Book direct and save.